So, back in February, I received the following letter from a student at Linfield College, and according to its website, with campuses in McMinnville, Portland, and a prestigious online program, Linfield College is a premier choice in the Pacific Northwest for a high-quality, traditional liberal arts education. Want to learn more? Contact us for details about our degree and certificate program offerings. A student there, who I won't name, sent me the following letter. Dear Dr. Peterson, I'm an undergraduate student at Linfield College in McMinnville, Oregon. The International Students for Liberty Conference recently granted me a small sum to organize pro-liberty events on campus, with an emphasis on the importance of free speech. I'm writing to ask you if you're accepting speaking invitations at this time, and if your schedule sometime between now and May would allow it, to help narrow down my options. I would like to offer you $1,500 and an invitation to speak here this spring semester. Your travel and accommodation costs will also be covered. I perceive Linfield as an institution at an ideological crossroads. I feel it is my responsibility to pick the most effective voice possible for helping Linfield chart a course that will ensure its future as a place of reason and academic integrity. After listening to many of your lectures and interviews, I believe your message is ideal for our campus. Honest and productive argumentation is one of your specialties. Linfield would greatly benefit from being introduced to your ideas on the subject. We are a small college of roughly 2,000 students, situated in quiet wine country. Your work continues to have a deep impact on my personal and intellectual growth. I'd be honored to hear from you. Thank you for your time and consideration. So, after considering it for a while, I agreed to come and speak at Linfield College. On March 18th, I received a note from the inviting student, who said, "Good morning, Dr. Peterson. I would be overjoyed to confirm a day." So we went about doing that. On April 7th, he replied to me again to update me. He said, "The talk will be held in ICE Auditorium in Melrose Hall, April 24th, beginning at 7 p.m. I'm referring to the event simply as a talk with Jordan Peterson, because his speaking style allows for a lot of fluidity in topic. However, the core theme to the event is the importance of freedom of speech, especially in higher education. Some of the administration/student government have begun to fret about the potential for people to feel, open quote, offended and oppressed, close quote, by Peterson's talk. It's more pushback than I expected at Linfield, but I don't think it's a cause for concern. I'm fighting hard to keep their worries at bay, and there's a very supportive group of students and community members who have my back. Free speech will win." On April 17th, the following article appeared in student newspaper by Kelia Neal, editor-in-chief. It's called "Hate Symbol on Ball Riles Campus." The Linfield Young Americans for Liberty Group's free speech ball outside of Walker Hall on April 12th received attention from students and faculty when a student drew Peppy the Frog, which has recently been appropriated by white supremacist groups. Linfield College posted a picture of the ball on its Instagram account, but it was later removed because of the frog's association with alt-right groups. As soon as it was pointed out that the photo included the image, the Instagram post was removed, President Thomas Helly said. The Free Speech Ball event, the first event in the Speak Freely series at Linfield, encouraged students to express themselves by writing and drawing on the ball to promote free speech. Peppy the Frog is a popular internet meme that has often appeared in humorous ways. The Anti-Defamation League has listed Peppy the Frog on its hate symbols database. I only heard about it secondhand, and I understand that it is a place for free speech, but in all reality, it was certainly done in very poor taste, Junior John Christensen said. According to its website, the YAL's mission is to, open quote, identify, educate, train, and mobilize youth activists committed to winning on principle. Our goal is to cast the leaders of tomorrow and reclaim the policies, candidates, and direction of our government, close quote. A member of YAL drew the Peppy the Frog on the ball, but asked to remain unidentified. Open quote, "I knew the person who drew Peppy. He didn't draw it to be negative. He drew it to be funny," close quote, Senior Parker Wells, a member of YAL, said. He continued, "We understand some groups appropriated the image, but any image can be appropriated." Wells said his goals with the free speech ball were to get people thinking about the rights to free expression and to bring more attention to the YAL group. He said, "I understand that it's necessary to set limits, but I don't think this cartoon frog is a limit to set for free speech. I find it unfortunate that people can't enjoy this event because of the frog image." As a part of its Speak Freely series, YAL is bringing Dr. Jordan Peterson to campus on Monday, April 24th. The group is also showing the documentary The Red Pill on Tuesday, May 2nd. Professor of English Reshmi Dutt-Ballerstad said, open quote, "I find both the invitation of Jordan Peterson and the screening of the documentary The Red Pill by the Young Americans for Liberty Club extremely problematic. Problematic because neither Peterson nor the film will be promoting dialogues about gendered inclusions, but rather be promoting a dangerous and offensive logic of gendered exclusions." Dutt-Ballerstad continued, "The promotion of such exclusionary practices greatly threatens safe spaces for our students, staff, and faculty who belong to marginalized groups and violates our ethos of upholding mutual respect on our campus." The President's Diversity Committee will hold a discussion at 5:30 p.m. on Monday in the Pioneer Reading Room titled Free Speech, What It Is and What It Is Not. The discussion will examine free speech, and members of the Linfield community are encouraged to attend. So that's the end of that newspaper article. So I read that. It was forwarded to me. Soon after, I tweeted the following message. Open quote, "I'm violating some more safe spaces soon. Linfield College, April 24th. Well, on April 19th, I received a letter from the student who'd organized my talk. He said, "Things have gone nuclear." This email, the one I'm going to read to you, was just sent to all of Linfield. One of the stipulations they are referring to is the contract, which they rejected because it was a day late. Our club is currently looking for space in downtown McMinnville to hold Peterson's talk instead. The media is likely getting involved. I'm sorry for this insanity. We tried very hard to keep things civil here." So here is the letter sent out to the entire community. Linfield community. I am writing on behalf of the Linfield Cabinet as officer in charge while President Helly is out. I want to let the Linfield community know that the ASLC, Associated Students of Linfield College, has determined it will not fund Dr. Jordan Peterson's appearance next week because stipulations for the event were not met by the requester, Young Americans for Liberty. Since the authorization parameters were not satisfied, the college will not host the event on April 24th. Among the stipulations was that the event was to be a private Linfield College-only event. By his own tweet yesterday to 107,000 followers, Dr. Peterson indicates he would be, open quote, "violating more safe spaces soon. Linfield College," close quote. Like-minded supporters from outside our community have responded affirmatively. Our policy on anti-harassment protection and academic freedom states that, open quote, "anti-harassment policies are not intended to limit the free exchange of opinions or the vigorous debate over ideas. However, intimidation, harassment, exploitation, and the use or threat of force are incompatible with the preservation of this freedom." The letter continues, "Based on the speaker's own words, this event no longer presents the possibility of academic inquiry within the Linfield community. Our policy is clear. Open quote, "Harassment and intimidation preclude the very possibility for maintaining an atmosphere of academic freedom. We cannot welcome speakers when the stipulations for their appearances are not met and who intend to violate the safety of our community. Respectfully, Susan Agra Kippenham." So I wrote a letter to Susan Agra Kippenham. Now, you understand that by this time the flights had been arranged, the accommodation had been arranged, everything was in place. And of course they had known about this for a long time. "Dear Susan, I received a copy of your letter to the Linfield community this morning. as well as an indication that my long-scheduled talk at Linfield has been cancelled. That is fine, I suppose, except that the plane tickets have been booked and the hotel reservations have been made, as well as 3 days taken out of my schedule at my expense. I think you are treating me and the student group who invited me in a manner that is absolutely reprehensible, as well as cowardly and underhanded. I have made arrangements to come to Linfield, which is extremely distant from me and out of the way, in good faith. Now you cancel it with a plethora of specious reasons, including your anti-harassment policy, although I have harassed no one, nor intimidated, exploited, or threatened force. Had I not previously received notice of the controversy around my arrival, which is in my opinion unwarranted, I would not have tweeted my intent to, open quote, violate safe spaces, close quote, which is a satirical comment in case it needs to be said. Obviously, you were looking for any excuse, no matter how trivial, to cancel this event. You also note that, open quote, this event no longer presents the possibility of academic inquiry within the Linfield community, close quote. I might point out that Linfield is a college, not a community, and that ideas need to be discussed in a college. You also state that, open quote, anti-harassment policies are not intended to limit the free exchange of opinions or the vigorous debate over ideas, close quote, and then proceed to do exactly that. You also mentioned that you have received support from, open quote, like-minded supporters, close quote, from outside your community, which is hardly surprising or informative given that they were like-minded. You also suggest that because the contract was delayed 1 day, that constitutes sufficient grounds for cancellation, even though you knew perfectly well that the event was booked and finalized, and that such delays are by no means unheard of in such situations. You might also note that a guest invited to your college might expect to be treated with a modicum of consideration and respect. Here's what I plan to do. I'm going to make a video tomorrow morning at the latest, reading this letter on YouTube, explaining that my invitation has been revoked, what that means for me, and the nature of the reasons given. I will also read this letter of response from me. It should be watched by about 150,000 viewers, many of whom I imagine will be Linfield alumni, supporters, and students. I am perfectly willing to see what they all have to say. Then we can let the dust settle where it may. Sincerely, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, Professor of Psychology, University of Toronto. I received absolutely nothing in response. I've got no, they didn't even have the decency to send me a notification explaining their rationale. Nothing. So I was treated, as far as I'm concerned, with well, let's call it unprofessionally and leave it at that. So what's the story now? The organizing students tried to book an alternative venue. They didn't have enough money to rent a suitable theater or lecture hall. I told them that they could use my honorarium to pay for the space, which they did. The Yamhill Valley News Register.com posted this update April 20th. Off-campus venue found for controversial speaker. Linfield College's student government organization this week withdrew permission for a newly organized club, Young Americans for Liberty, to bring a controversial speaker to campus for a free public talk Monday. The group has responded by lining up an off-campus location for the presentation featuring Jordan Peterson, a Canadian professor whose campaign against gender-neutral pronouns is considered offensive by some to the transgender population. Peterson has been rebooked for 7 to 9 p.m. at the Falls Event Center, housed in the former chapel on the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum campus. So, on with the show. And you can figure out what I think of the Linfield administrators who pulled this stunt on your own. Thanks for watching.
So I'm going to start this by reading you something that I wrote specifically for this talk. I always want to do something different in each talk because, well, I've already done the previous talk, and partly the reason that you talk is to get things clear in your mind. It's a good way of thinking. It's the best way of thinking. So I suppose in some sense I don't know if it's a poem, Maybe that's what it is. It's what I hope to cover tonight. So what I'm going to do is read you the outline first. I guess it's an outline. And then I'm going to go through it line by line and see if I can clarify to you and also to me what I mean. So I'm going to orient the talk tonight around the ethics of free speech. We've talked a lot about, or thought a lot about, let's say, the right to free speech, and something you might want to also consider the obligation to free speech, because I actually think it's deeper than a right. I think you're obligated to speak freely, because otherwise people don't have the benefit of your whatever wisdom you possess. And at least you possess the wisdom of your own experience. At the very least you have that, and that's as valid a form of truth as any other form of truth, and it's often a truth that can be usefully communicated to other people. And so it's to the community's benefit that you say what your experience has taught you, because there isn't anyone who has experience like you. And one of the things that I've learned from being a clinical psychologist, but I would say more specifically from being a very careful listener, is that if you listen to people and they can talk to you, they tell you the most amazing things. You know, my typical week, I compare my work. Even today, you know, I was speaking to 4 different people. They're supporters of mine online, and I meet with some of them. And I had 4 conversations that were just absolutely profound, you know. And it's so interesting, because if people are allowed, encouraged to express themselves, and that's something that you can do by listening to someone, they open up, and it's as interesting as a Dostoevsky novel. People's actual lives are extraordinarily interesting, and it's important that they can speak freely about them, because then they can tell you all the things they know that you don't know, and then you get to know them, and that's such a good deal. So I'm going to tell you some things that I believe to be true, and that will constitute the backbone of this talk. So the first thing is that life is suffering. And then I would say that this is my attempt to reconcile the existence of multiple transcendent virtues. Transcendent virtues are the lights that guide you through your life, essentially, the principles by which it's necessary to live if you're going to have a life that's meaningful and profound and beneficial. And there are multiple transcendent values, and it isn't clear how they relate to one another. And this is my attempt to understand how they relate. And so I started with the truth that I believe to be supreme, which is that life is suffering. And then that love is the desire to see unnecessary suffering ameliorated. And that truth is the handmaiden of love. And that dialogue is the pathway to truth. And that humility is recognition of personal insufficiency and the willingness to learn. And that to learn is to die voluntarily and be born again in great ways and small. So speech must be untrammeled so that dialogue can take place, so that we can all humbly learn, so that truth can serve love, so that suffering can be ameliorated, so that we can all stumble forward, so to speak, to the kingdom of God. Then there's the other kind of suffering that we bring upon ourselves, and I would categorize that under the heading of malevolence. And malevolence is the desire to increase suffering in some sense for the sake of suffering itself. It's like an art form. I think that's the best way to conceptualize it. It's something aesthetic. It's the same aesthetic that drove the Nazis to put that terrible joke above the gates of Auschwitz, which was that work would make you free. And of course, the freedom that was being offered in the Nazi camps was death, and that was a great, terrible joke. And it's a very malevolent spirit that would dare to joke in that manner, but that's a spirit that we all have to contend with, because there's part of each of us that, because of the suffering that life entails, is bitter about existence and would wish, in some sense, to see it eradicated. That's something I learned from reading Goethe's great play, Faust. He has a character in there, Mephistopheles, who's sort of the intellectual version of Satan, I suppose. And Goethe has Mephistopheles attempt to explain the reason for his existence, or at least the reason for his mode of being. And Mephistopheles basically says, and Goethe has to say this twice, that because existence is characterized by such dreadful suffering, it would be better if it never existed at all. And that's what he's working to bring about. And that struck me in a very deep manner, because I had recognized by that time that life was difficult enough so that it was challenging to walk through it without becoming embittered and resentful, let's say, and then to become arrogant because of that, and then to become a judge of existence because of that. And if you ever wonder, and of course you do, what is going through the minds of people who do such things as shoot up elementary schools full of school children, knowing the things that I just described is very useful in developing some understanding, because the people who do that are resentful and bitter, and they've brooded upon it for, well, not hours, but weeks and months and years. And they conclude that existence itself is evil, and that it should be taken revenge upon. And the way that you take revenge upon existence most precisely is to find the most innocent people and punish them the most dreadfully. And that's the motive behind shooting elementary school kids in a playground, let's say. And that's a very dark place to go. But that's a place that people are perfectly capable of going. And the terrible thing is that we have the motivation to go there. And you can make a rational case for going there, but that doesn't make it the proper place to go. And that brings me to the second point, which is that love is the desire to see unnecessary suffering ameliorated. Love is a very difficult word to use, because in some sense it's been mouthed to death. You know, it's such a commonplace. And if you're attempting to affect virtue, then the first thing you do is speak about love, and it's very difficult to speak about love without feeling, I would say, self-contempt, really, because it is a word that's misused so badly. But I'd like to offer a technical definition of it, and then put it into proper relationship with what I already discussed. If hatred is the desire to see being eliminated because of its catastrophe, then love is the desire to see being elevated, maybe even because of that suffering, and to say that the proper orientation in life is to work diligently for the alleviation of unnecessary suffering, and to make that the core element of your being, your actual aim, because you need an aim. Everyone needs an aim. We're creatures who are evolved to aim. We're hunters, for that matter, and we need a target to aim at. We're not ever oriented properly without an aim. And then you might say, well, why not choose an aim that is everything that you could possibly want it to be? And I would say that is what you want to do, because, first of all, being miserable and vulnerable and subject to catastrophe and decay, it's easy to sink into self-contempt and misery, self-conscious misery. And I think the only way out of that is to voluntarily shoulder a burden that the shouldering of grants you some respect for your own existence. And so then you think, well, the way forward confidently is to find the biggest load that you can possibly lift, and then lift it, and then walk forward with it, because then you can see that there's something to you that transcends your vulnerability and ennobles the world and works against the very terrible problems of both suffering and malevolence that might drive you to despair to begin with.